Hi guys, Max here. In this video we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine, what's actually happening on the ground, and in specifics, what's changed from our last update 2 days ago. And we're not going to look too much into the finance side of things here at all, so if you want an update regarding that, then you need to watch today's earlier video. Link as always is down below in the description. So the last time we spoke about the war, what we saw was Russian offensives being pushed back and repelled in the north of the country near Kiev, Chernihiv, and then further east as well in Sumy and Kharkiv, and then from the Donbass around Luhansk and Donetsk, still no successful advance at all from the Russian army. On the southern front though, the invasion from Crimea had seen some successes and Russian forces were advancing. Now due to the failures of the Russian army, they were in the process of changing tactics and they were starting to increase the intensity and the frequency of their bombing campaign, and they started actually explicitly targeting civilian population centres as well. Now that was about 2 days ago, and the situation right now is almost identical actually. Kiev is still holding out, previously almost surrounded at some points, but right now Russian forces are completely incapable of wrapping around the city and they are actually stuck a little bit to the north, about 5 to 10 miles away, and while they've made attempts to get into the city, they never make it more than a couple kilometers before they are destroyed and forced back. Now there is a huge 40-mile long convoy of Russian forces north of Kiev, supposedly backup preparation for that next assault on the capital. It has become stationary though, the convoy isn't actually moving, and some people are starting to call it a traffic jam instead of a convoy, and that's a fair assessment. Now the lack of Russian air superiority over the city, over the country even, means that that convoy is under threat. And there is loads of footage of Turkish-made drones run by the Ukrainian Air Force destroying Russian convoys all over the country. Now Chernihiv is a city northeast of Kiev and it was a big target for Russia. They also failed to push in though. Russians did encircle it, but at this point right now, they're pretty much ignoring the city, forgetting about trying to take control of it now, and they're moving most of the troops which previously were trying to push in, and those men are going to help on the attack on Kiev from the east of the river because Kiev is priority number one. Now further east again, Sumy and Kharkiv are again big targets, big population centres and major points where the Ukrainian army has decided to hold. Kharkiv is probably the number 2 target of the entire Russian campaign, but again the Russians seem completely incapable of actually taking the city. The Ukrainian army is very strong in defence. Now this does seem to be frustrating the Russian soldiers and their leadership, so they are starting to launch far more missile strikes at the cities themselves. Grad missiles, basically rockets that are fired from the ground, dumb-fired, unguided. They are hitting apartment blocks, city intersections, and they're killing lots of civilians, but Russia seemingly isn't too bothered about killing civilians anymore like they were at the beginning of the campaign. Now that is the escalation that we've been talking about over the last few days. As Russia gets frustrated with their lack of progress, rules of engagements will get looser, troops will get less disciplined, and generals more desperate, and they will resort to more brutal tactics like targeting civilians with munitions. Now in Donbass, the Russian offensive is almost non-existent and there's been literally no progress from the entire war even. In fact, Ukrainian forces went on the offensive a little bit here yesterday and they briefly captured the town of Holivka before retreating as the Russians counterattacked. Again, Ukrainian forces on the ground are very efficient, fighting very well and fiercely motivated, which is in stark contrast to Russian troops, and the Russians seem completely incapable of pushing through. The problem though, from the Ukrainian point of view, comes from the south with the invasion from Crimea again. Now this is the area that I've said is to watch. It's the place where Russia's progress is, so it's very important that we see some change there soon. Unfortunately though, Russia is still making progress here, mainly where there isn't much Ukrainian army resistance, to be fair. They took 2 large cities, Melitopol and Berdyansk, on the push out of Crimea eastwards, and they took Kherson to the west. Reportedly though, there has been very little resistance here and it was mostly undefended. There's lots of video of Russian troops in the city centre at government buildings and lots of civilians protesting their presence, but no military to actually defend the cities. The exception here might be Kherson though, where some resistance was found, but there wasn't an awful lot and there's far less resistance than in other defended cities like in Kharkiv. Now this front on the west is now starting to siege the city of Mykolaiv. Reportedly though, Ukrainian defenders are here, and if it's anything like Kharkiv or Kiev, this should be very difficult to Russia to take this city. The fear is though that if this city does fall, then Odessa is next and the entire coastline of Ukraine could fall to Russian hands. There's also been a reported attempted assault on Odessa by Russian Marines and the Navy. Apparently though, there was a mutiny on board and the Marines refused to attack the city. This is actually unconfirmed as of yet, but it's entirely possible, and the Russian army are denying everything. Of course they are. They're still claiming only one dead Russian across the entire war, when in reality that number is likely just in excess of 2,000. Now, on the eastern push from Crimea, there's a little bit more trouble. Mariupol is surrounded by Russian forces, and there are lots of Ukrainian forces in the city. Morale does seem very high, though. There's actually a British guy who fought against ISIS in Syria, and he's now in Ukraine with their Marines, and he's fighting against the Russians. He's stuck in the city, but he said they're surrounded. The forces are aware of that. There's no way out, but they're not surrendering. To be honest though, as long as their supplies last, until they literally run out of NLAWs and Javelin missiles and weapons and ammo, it's unlikely that they will lose that city anytime soon. The same thing we've seen all over. Russian soldiers are unmotivated and don't want to die. Ukrainians are fiercely motivated and not giving up. The bad thing about this, though, is that Mariupol was stopping Russian troops in the Donbass from connecting with Russian troops from the Crimean invasion, and so within a couple of days, the Russian forces will likely unite this front, and that could help them push further west into Ukraine, which is a little bit worrying. Now, what are the actual losses for the war looking at like today? Well, civilian casualties for Ukraine have really started to pick up over the last 2 days as Russia has started bombing cities, as I earlier said, and there are now 2,000 civilian dead from this war. Now that is really bad. That is a massive increase from this Russian escalation, and unfortunately it looks like this number is just going to keep getting worse. Now there is loads of footage of these strikes specifically targeting civilian targets. You can check out my Twitter if you want to see the evidence of it. Link as always is down below in the description, but it's very real what is happening. For Russia as well, though, the situation is getting far worse. Now, this information is from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and they are booking 5,840 Russian casualties. Probably that number includes about 1/3 killed and the rest wounded or captured, so about 2,000 Russians killed. This is hard to verify, but from the material losses that we've seen, the prisoners taken, this seems to be quite an accurate and a fair assessment. Now, in terms of material destroyed, well, there are 30 planes and 31 helicopters destroyed, 211 main battle tanks, 85 artillery pieces, 860 armoured vehicles, 40 rocket artillery, 355 unarmoured vehicles, 60 fuel tanks, 3 drones, and 9 surface-to-air missile systems. Now again, those are huge numbers, those are huge casualties, and they're not getting any less. So that's why Russia is switching their tactics, because taking these huge losses and not actually beating Ukrainians on the ground means they need to change something. Now, we are pretty much completely unaware of the amount of Ukrainian losses, to be honest. There is loads of random information, but it's all wildly different, and the military doesn't want Russia to have accurate information either, so they're not necessarily releasing everything they know. We really don't know what the situation is for Ukraine itself, how many have been killed, but we do know that the numbers are grave. Now, that is the situation on the ground. Russian forces are only really making progress in the south, and even there, it's unclear if it's due to Russian strength to their strong troops, or from a lack of Ukrainian resistance. One thing I do want to bring up though is about maps of the conflict showing the land gained by Russia and how a lot of it is actually quite misleading. This is the kind of map that you see on mainstream media from somewhere like the BBC, but the problem is this is not the First World War. Front lines are not clear, we don't have trenches and a man every foot holding the ground. The reality is that Russia is only really advancing across main roads in long convoys. They aren't garrisoning all this land, and it isn't actually under their control. It's not under Ukrainian military control either. Most of Ukrainian land is undefended, with strong points at cities like Kiev and Kharkiv where the bulk of the forces are. The real gains made by Russia are actually more like this map, thin advances through mostly unimportant land towards valuable strongpoints. Now, Crimea and separatist areas are the only parts under full Russian control under their administration, outside of some towns Russia has taken like Kherson in the south. Even this map though is a day old at this point. Some progress has been made in the southeast towards Mariupol, for example. This map is slightly outdated, but other than that, it's quite accurate and it gives a far better idea of the actual progress made by Russian troops. Now, negotiations between Russia and Ukraine really haven't seemed to got anywhere substantial, to be honest. They are set to continue, but don't get too hopeful. Two sides are very far apart here, and Belarus was supposed to stop missiles from firing at Ukraine from their land during negotiations, but they haven't. They are still firing missiles at cities, so it's hard to say that negotiations are happening in good faith. That is pretty much it for today. I'm afraid I don't have much more time, so I can't go into more detail, but we will have another Ukraine war update in no time at all, so don't worry. If you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, you don't have to buy anything, you don't have to hand over any card information, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you get from any savings account these days. Just make sure not to use Tether. Thank you all for the support, thanks for watching, stay stoic, until next time.